I am Major Millie Conrad, 34 years old, of the United States Army JAG Corps. The air in this county courtroom is thick with the smell of old paper and desperation. My father, Robert, smirks at my mother, Elena, who is trembling like a leaf. "You're walking out of here with nothing," he hisses, his stubby finger pointing right at her. My mother, a woman who has been worn down to a mere whisper, reaches a trembling hand toward the pen, about to sign away 30 years of her sacrifice. I had been watching in silence, but the sound of my chair scraping harshly against the floor breaks it all. My voice is quiet, but it cuts through the room. "Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption." My father spins around, his face flushing red with rage. He has no idea that the Captain Clipboard he always mocked is about to detonate his entire world of lies. If you have ever been underestimated by your own family, if you have ever had to prove your worth in silence, let me know where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe, because my story is about the truth, the paperwork, and the high cost of arrogance. 6 weeks before I stood in that courtroom, we were at a steakhouse. My father, Robert, loved places like this. It was a classic Virginia establishment, the kind that pretends humility but charges you $40 for a glass of wine. Dark wood paneling, low amber lighting, and the heavy, expensive clinking of silverware. It smelled of seared beef and old leather. These places were his kingdom, fortresses built of dark wood and quiet deference, and in them, he was the king. Across the table, my mother, Eleni, sat opposite him, shrunk into herself, as she always did. She was a ghost haunting her own life, a woman who hadn't truly been present in years. Her eyes, which I remembered being bright and quick, were now dull, fixed on the water glass in front of her as if it held all the answers. And then there was me. I'd flown in from DC, still in my business casual attire, a silk blouse and slacks, feeling the familiar, heavy role of mediator settle onto my shoulders. I was supposed to be the buffer, the demilitarized zone. I was supposed to make this civilized. Robert, of course, was performing. He flagged the waiter down with a sharp snap of his fingers, ordering the most expensive T-bone on the menu. Rare, and make it quick. Followed by another old-fashioned. He loved the theater of it all. And before the appetizers could even arrive, he made his move. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thin stack of papers. It wasn't a formal legal document. It was a cheap printout stapled in the corner. He didn't hand it to my mother. He shoved it across the polished mahogany table like he was sliding scraps to a dog. "Here," he announced. His voice wasn't a whisper. It was a declaration, intentionally loud enough that the couple at the next table, a quiet pair celebrating an anniversary, by the looks of it, glanced over, their forks halfway to their mouths. "Your mother and I are getting a divorce," he continued, enjoying the audience. "I've been very generous." I picked up the papers. My legal training made my eyes scan them automatically. Generous. I saw the word. It meant that my mother, Elena Conrad, after 30 years of being a homemaker, 30 years of raising his children, 30 years of managing his home so he could build his empire, would walk away with a 10-year-old Honda Civic and a one-time payout that wouldn't even cover 6 months of rent in Northern Virginia. My mother's face went ashen. She just stared at the papers, her hands flat on the table. "Robert, please," she whispered, her voice cracking. This isn't right." I took a deep breath. I had to compartmentalize. This wasn't a daughter, this was a legal professional. I tried to keep my voice calm, clinical. "Dad," I said, meeting his eyes, "this isn't a legal division of assets in Virginia. This isn't how it works. Mom is entitled to 50%. He cut me off, not with a word, but with a laugh. It was a sharp, barking sound that made the nearby couple flinch. He laughed so hard he slapped the table, the silverware jumping. "Oh my God," he boomed, gesturing to me with a meaty hand. "Are you hearing this? Captain Clipboard is going to lecture me on the law?" My entire body went hot. A flush started at my chest and crept up my neck, burning my ears. Captain Clipboard. That was his name for me. It was the nickname he'd given me the day I joined the military. It was a weapon, a poison-tipped dart he'd spent the last decade using. It was meticulously designed to diminish me, to erase every accomplishment I had ever earned. West Point? Just a fancy camp. My law degree from Georgetown? A piece of paper. My rank as a major in the United States Army? Just a title for a glorified secretary. In his eyes, I was and would always be a low-level paper pusher, a clipboard carrier. He saw the flicker of pain in my eyes, and it made him lean in, the predator smelling blood. The performative smile vanished, replaced by the cold, familiar superiority I'd known my whole life. "Listen to me, Millie," he said, his voice dropping to a condescending growl. "This is the real world. This is the adults' table. You can go back to your little base and play with your paper clips and your pretend soldier games. But here, I make the rules." He tapped the thin stack of papers with a thick index finger. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was sharp in the restaurant's expensive quiet. "Your mother will sign this," he said, his eyes locking onto me, bypassing my mother completely. "Or I will ruin her. I will drag this out in court for years. I'll bury her in legal fees until she doesn't have a penny left to her name. She will be homeless. She will be on the street. Do you understand me?" He leaned back then, the threat delivered. He picked up his scotch, swirled the ice, and took a long, satisfied sip. He believed he had won. He believed it was over. I looked at my mother. She had stopped whispering. She was just crying. Silent, racking sobs, her shoulders shaking as she tried to muffle the sounds with her napkin. She was utterly broken. And that's when I felt it. The click. The sound of a 30-year dam of suppressed rage, of swallowed insults, of practiced smiles, finally cracking. The quiet, disciplined part of me that had endured and observed and recorded everything finally stepped forward. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. I looked at this man, my father, who saw me as nothing more than a child in a costume. He had no idea who he was talking to. He didn't know that Captain Clipboard was his dismissive term for a major in the JAG Corps. He didn't know that my specialty wasn't playing with paper. My specialty is forensic accounting and international asset seizure. He didn't know that my entire day job, the pretend game I played, was hunting arrogant, powerful men just like him. Men who thought they were above the law. Men who thought they were smart enough to hide their money. Men who laundered millions through complex webs of international shell corporations. He, in his spectacular arrogance, hadn't just insulted his daughter. He had just challenged an apex predator in her own hunting ground. I folded the papers neatly and slid them into my purse. My mother's sobs quieted to shaky breaths. Robert watched me, a smug smirk returning to his face, believing my silence was submission. "Okay, Dad," I said. My voice was perfectly calm. "I'll look it over." He chuckled, already signaling the waiter for another drink. He had no idea he'd just signed his own death warrant. The nickname, Captain Clipboard, wasn't new. It wasn't invented over that steak dinner. It had been my father's weapon for years, his favorite tool to keep me in my place. And my father, Robert Conrad, was a man who loved his tools. That night at the steakhouse, the arrogance he showed was just a dress rehearsal. His true stage, his real kingdom, was our backyard. I remember a barbecue. It was last summer, right before I was scheduled for deployment. It was a suffocatingly hot, humid Virginia July day, the kind where the air is so thick you can drink it. Our backyard was packed, maybe 50 or 60 people, neighbors, business associates, people who laughed a little too loudly at his jokes. My father was at his absolute peak. He was standing by his grill, this massive, gleaming stainless steel Traeger monstrosity that probably cost more than my first car. He was holding a spatula like it was a royal scepter, and a cold, high-end craft IPA in his other hand. He was lording over a massive smoking beef brisket, explaining the art of the smoke ring to a captive audience. "It's all about the supply chain of the heat, you see," he'd say, using business terms for everything. "You can't just throw it on. It's logistics. You have to manage the assets." He thought he had invented these words. People just smiled and nodded and drank his beer. In this tiny suburban kingdom of manicured lawns and deck furniture, he was the king. And where was I? I was standing quietly by the potato salad. I wasn't in uniform. I was wearing a simple, cheap sundress, feeling awkward and out of place. I was an accessory, a set piece in his grand production. Then, he saw me. He squinted through the smoke. "Hey, Millie!" he shouted, his voice booming across the yard. Everyone turned. He waved me over with the spatula. "Come on over here, girl." I felt that familiar hot dread creep up my neck, but I went. I walked across the grass, feeling the eyes of our neighbors on me. He threw a heavy, sweaty arm over my shoulder, pulling me into the cloud of hickory smoke. "Everyone, you see this?" he announced to the crowd, pulling me tighter. "My daughter, Millie, still playing Army." A few people chuckled. It was an awkward, forced sound. The sound people make when they're uncomfortable, but don't want to challenge the man providing the free beer. "I keep asking her," my father continued, his voice dripping with mock concern. "I keep asking, when are you going to take off that glorified Girl Scout uniform and get a real job in my world?" The air went silent for a second. The only sound was the sizzle of the fat on the grill. And then my father burst out laughing, that sharp, barking laugh he used at the steakhouse. Relieved, the others laughed with him. "A real job," he repeated, shaking his head as if I were a lost cause. His world. I just smiled. It was the smile. The stiff, brittle, practiced smile that I had spent an entire lifetime perfecting. It was the smile of a trained soldier, a mask of neutrality I wore in my own home. "Work's fine, Dad," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He laughed again, louder this time. "Fine? What's fine? Are you making 7 figures yet?" "No, then it's not fine. It's a hobby." And then, he did it. In front of all of them, our neighbors, his employees, the people who had known me since I was a child, he patted me on the head. It wasn't a loving stroke. It wasn't a fatherly ruffle. It was that hard, condescending, repetitive pat, pat, pat. The kind you give a dog that's just done a simple trick. The kind that says, "You're a pet." "Good girl," he said, his voice full of dismissive amusement. "Now go get your dad another beer." I felt the heat of dozens of eyes on me. I saw the pity in Mrs. Henderson's face from across the yard. I saw the embarrassment from one of my old high school classmates. I felt like I was shrinking, disappearing, being reduced to nothing. I just nodded. And I went to get the beer. But inside that internal ledger I keep in my head, click. A new page turned. A new entry was made. Another debt was recorded, the interest compounding. It was always like that. The system was designed to keep me small. It was the same system that operated on the proudest day of my life, my graduation from West Point. I can still feel that day. The sheer, overwhelming sense of accomplishment. Standing on the field at Michie Stadium, a sea of 4,000 of us in our formal gray uniforms. The roar of the crowd, the cannons, the moment the Thunderbirds flew over, and the final glorious cascade of hats thrown into the air. I scanned the stands and found my mother. She was weeping, her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes brimming with a pride so fierce it was the only thing I could see. But then, there was the dinner afterward. We were at a stuffy, overpriced restaurant near the academy. My mother was still glowing, still holding my hand, still touching the sleeve of my dress uniform. My father, however, was complaining about the hotel price. He'd been quiet for most of the meal, just chewing his steak. Finally, he sighed, threw his napkin on the table, and looked at me. "Well," he said, loud enough for the tables around us to hear. "That's that. At least your 4 years of college were free." My mother's smile froze. "Now," he continued, leaning in, "let's see if you can actually make something of yourself with it, or if you're just going to waste government time playing with paper." That was it. That was his congratulation. 4 years of hell, of beast barracks, of 5 a.m. runs in the snow, of engineering exams and tactical training, all of it, my entire achievement, reduced to free college and wasting time. I didn't say anything. I just stared at my plate, but I felt my mother's hand find mine under the table. She gripped it, hard. Her nails dug into my palm. She didn't say a word. She couldn't say a word, but that hand grip said everything. I see you. I am proud of you. Don't listen. It's a strange, lonely feeling, isn't it? Knowing that the one person who should be your biggest champion is your biggest critic, and the one person who believes in you has no voice. If you've ever had that one person who supported you in silence, who couldn't speak up but you knew was on your side, please support me by hitting that like button and comment with a simple, I know, so I know you're here. My mother's silent grip. That was my validation. Her silent recognition was the only recognition I got. That was all I had. My mother's hand squeezing mine under the table. That was all I had. For 4 years, that silent pressure, that one moment of shared, secret pride, was the only validation I ever received from my family. My father thought I was weak. Maybe he was right at first. He saw the graduation, the pomp, the free college. He didn't see the cost. He didn't see how I got there. He didn't see the trial that forged the woman he would one day call Captain Clipboard. He didn't see my plebe year. My first year at West Point, the plebe year, was, by design, hell on earth. It's a system, a pressure cooker, specifically engineered to find your breaking point and shatter it. You are broken down into your component parts and then maybe rebuilt as a soldier. I was not a natural fit. I came from a home where every strong emotion was suppressed, where conflict was something to be avoided, where my mother's primary survival tactic was to become invisible. I was thrown into a cauldron of constant, aggressive confrontation. Everything was stacked against me. I was small, 5'4", and barely 115 pounds. I was a woman in an environment that was, at its core, a temple of aggressive masculinity. I was quiet. The system found every weakness. The 4 a.m. wake-ups, the screaming, the endless mind-numbing memorization of regulations, the physical exhaustion that went so deep it felt like it was in your bone marrow. I remember one night, or rather, one morning, in the dead of winter. It was 5 a.m., still pitch black, and it was snowing. That wet, heavy, miserable New York snow. I was standing in a field in full gear, covered in mud from a low-crawl exercise, my hands so cold I couldn't feel the rifle I was holding. I was shaking, not just from the cold, but from sheer, primal exhaustion. I looked around at the other cadets, all of us just miserable ghosts in the dark, and I had a moment of terrifying clarity. What the hell am I doing here? My father was right. This wasn't for me. I didn't belong. I was a fraud, a little girl playing a soldier's game, just like he said. That night, I hit my breaking point. I huddled in my dorm room, aching and defeated, and I did the one thing I promised myself I wouldn't do. I called home. I just needed to hear a kind word. I needed one person to say, "You can do this." My mother picked up on the first ring, her voice tight with anxiety. "Millie, are you okay?" I couldn't even answer. I just choked on a sob. "Millie, honey, what's wrong?" I heard the panic in her voice, and before I could find my own, I heard a sound that I knew all too well. A rustle, and the click of the phone being picked up in another room. "Give me that," I heard my father's voice, muffled. "Elena, hang up." A moment later, his voice was in my ear, sharp and annoyed. "Millie, you still there?" "Dad," I whispered. "I figured you'd be calling," he said, and there was no warmth in it, just impatience. "Figured you'd be calling to say you'd finally quit." "I've been waiting." I stopped breathing. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't even disappointed. He was expectant. "That whole army game isn't for you, kid," he said, his voice softening into that fake, condescending tone he used when he was about to teach me something. "It's a waste of your time. You're not cut out for it. Why don't you come home? I'll give you a job in the office. You can do data entry. Something simple." Data entry. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask if I was hurt. He didn't ask what was wrong. He was just waiting for me to fail. He had the simple job all lined up, the one he thought I was actually suited for. I clicked the phone off. I didn't say goodbye. I sat on my cot in the dark, and I cried. I cried for a long time. But I wasn't crying because of the cold, or the mud, or the screaming instructors. I was crying from the absolute, crushing, profound loneliness of knowing that the one man who was supposed to be my protector was actively rooting for my failure. I had almost given up. The next day, I was a ghost. I went through the motions, the insults from the upperclassmen bouncing right off me. I was hollowed out. I decided he was right. I would quit. I shuffled to the library, my boots heavy with defeat. I was going to look up the official withdrawal procedures. I was going to call him back and tell him he'd won. The West Point Library is old, full of history and ghosts. As I walked past the history annex intending to find a computer, I passed a small glass display case. It was an exhibit on the American Revolution, something I had walked past 100 times. But this time, I stopped. Inside was a small faded portrait of a woman. She wasn't a lady in a fine dress. She was wearing rough, simple clothes, and she had a determined look on her face. Her name was Margaret Corbin. I read the plaque. She was the wife of an artilleryman, John Corbin, during the Revolutionary War. She had followed him to the Battle of Fort Washington. During the assault, he was killed right at his cannon. And Margaret? She didn't run. She didn't scream or hide. She stepped over her husband's body, took his place at the cannon, and continued to fire at the attacking Hessian soldiers. She kept firing, alone, until she herself was severely wounded by grape shot, nearly tearing her arm and chest apart. She was a real soldier. She fought not for recognition. She fought not because someone told her she could. She fought because her husband fell. And the cannon was there, and the enemy was coming, and it needed to be done. I stared at that little portrait for a long time. I looked at her eyes, at the simple, profound grit captured by the artist. I realized in that moment that my father would never see me. Ever. It didn't matter if I graduated. It didn't matter if I became a general. To him, I would always be the data entry girl. I would always be Captain Clipboard. His validation was a door that would forever be locked to me. But Margaret Corbin didn't need anyone's permission to fight, and neither did I. I turned around and walked out of the library. I went back to my dorm. I sat on my cot, and with hands that were still sore and stiff, I laid out my cleaning kit. I dried my tears. I took a deep breath. And I started polishing my boots. I would not quit. I would not give him the satisfaction. I would graduate. I would become an officer. I would go to law school. I would become a lawyer in the United States Army. I wasn't doing it to make him proud. I realized finally that I couldn't. I was doing it for myself. And I was doing it for the one woman who believed in me in silence, the one woman who would be there at the end, gripping my hand under a dinner table, my mother. My father's world was loud backyard barbecues and empty boasts. His real world was a manicured lawn in Virginia and the petty tyranny of his living room, a kingdom built on the fear of a woman he had systematically broken. My real world was a sterile, windowless room, buried deep enough underground to withstand a direct missile strike. It was known as a SCIF. SCIF, pronounced skiff, stands for Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. It's a mouthful, which is why we just called it the SCIF. It's a place where cell phones are forbidden, where the walls are shielded against electronic surveillance, where the doors open with a heavy vacuum-sealed thud. There are no windows. There is no small talk. There are no barking laughs or the clinking of Scotch glasses. There is only the low, steady hum of industrial-grade air filtration, the silent glow of encrypted monitors, and the oppressive, focused silence of intense concentration. In this room, I wasn't Millie. I wasn't Robert Conrad's disappointing daughter. And I damn sure wasn't Captain Clipboard. In here, I was Major Conrad. I was a forensic accounting specialist for the U.S. Army's Judge Advocate General's Corps. And my job, my real job, was to hunt the assets of terrorists, rogue states, and international criminals. My father thought his logistics were complex. I tracked millions of dollars hidden by warlords through networks designed to be invisible. My father thought his real job was high stakes. My pretend game was defunding global threats. I was working on a case. An Eastern European arms dealer had, we suspected, laundered over $50 million in illegal arms sales through a complex web of shell corporations. He was good. He was very good. He was using a classic, almost beautiful, three-layer structure. Money moved from an account in Dubai to a holding company in Cyprus, which was then billed for fictitious consulting services by a corporation in Delaware, which then distributed the funds to untraceable accounts. It was clean. It was meticulous. It was almost perfect. The door to the skiff hissed open, and my commander, a two-star Army general, walked in. General Davis. General Davis was a man of profound silence and terrifying efficiency. He was tall, thin, and seemed to move without disturbing the air around him. He was the kind of man who never raised his voice, because he never had to. When he spoke, you listened. He didn't say hello. He just appeared behind my workstation, his presence radiating a kind of calm, cold authority. He looked at my screens, not at me. I had 4 of them, all displaying different complex data streams. "What have you got, Major?" His voice was a low, gravelly monotone, the sound of someone who has seen everything and is impressed by nothing. "Sir," I said. I didn't turn around. I just pointed to a line of code on my 4th monitor. "The target is good. As we thought, he's using a 3-tier shell structure based in Delaware and Cyprus. The layering is immaculate." "But?" the general asked. He knew there was a but. "But he got lazy, or arrogant. The same thing that gets them all." I pointed. "The Delaware corporation he used to bill the 3 Cypriot shells? He used the same registered agent for all of them. But on the 3rd filing, he misspelled the agent's name. A single typo. Is Smith instead of Smith. It created a digital crack. I've been pulling that thread for 72 hours. I clicked my mouse and a new diagram bloomed on the main screen. A complex web of arrows and accounts. The typo created a separate filing record, which he tried to correct. That correction required a notary, and that notary is linked to 2 other corporations we weren't tracking. They lead here. I pointed to a bank in the Cayman Islands. I found the legal loophole. His entire structure is compromised. We can freeze everything. Now. General Davis stared at the screen for a long, silent moment. 10 seconds. 20. I just waited, my heart pounding quietly in my chest. He processed the data. He saw the logic. He saw the intricate, beautiful weapon I just built from a single typo. Then he turned and looked at me. For the first time, he looked at me. He looked at me, not like a dog to be patted. Not like a child who had done a simple trick. He looked at me like a professional, like an expert, like a peer. He didn't pat me on the head. He didn't give me a stupid, condescending nickname. He just gave one sharp, definitive nod. "Good," he said. "Execute it, Major." That was all. "Execute it, Major." 3 words. With those 3 words, he handed me the authority to dismantle a $50 million criminal enterprise. With those 3 words, he gave me the keys to the kingdom. It wasn't praise. It was better. It was trust. It was absolute, unfiltered, professional respect. It was the one thing I had craved my entire life. It was the one thing I had never, not once, gotten at home. This is why, the day after that catastrophic steak dinner with my father, I didn't go back to my hotel room to cry. I went back to the only place I felt sane. I went back to the skiff. I hadn't slept. The echo of my father's threat, "I will drag this out until she is on the street," was still ringing in my ears. The image of my mother's silent, weeping, broken face was burned into my mind. I was, as the general would soon note, distracted. I was staring at a blank monitor, my mind 1,000 miles away. When General Davis walked past my desk, he was on his way out, but he paused. This was rare. He never paused. "Major," he said. That same even monotone. "You look distracted. Your focus is off." I looked up, my eyes gritty from lack of sleep and unshed tears. "Yes, sir. I apologize. It's just a family matter, General." I expected him to grunt and walk away. It wasn't his concern. It was personal, messy. Instead, he stood there for a second, just looking at me. "I see," he said. He almost sighed. The Army is a family, Conrad, he said, using my last name for the first time. It's complicated enough. But the family out there, he gestured vaguely toward the reinforced concrete ceiling, toward the outside world. That one. That's sometimes more complex than a war zone. He looked back at me, his eyes sharp. I don't know what it is, I don't need to. But whatever it is, handle it. Handle it with the exact same precision you apply in this room. He nodded once, that same definitive nod. Carry on. And then he was gone. It was the closest thing to a pep talk, to a moment of mentorship I had ever received from him. It was a 5-second interaction, but it meant more to me than 1,000 fake, booming compliments at a backyard barbecue. It was a lifeline. He wasn't just my commander. In that moment, he was my ally. This was my real family. A family built on competence, honor, and mutual respect, not on shared blood and a constant, petty, agonizing tyranny. My father had drawn his battle lines at that steakhouse. He thought he was declaring war on a clipboard carrier. He had no idea about the army I had standing right behind me. That night, I left the skiff with General Davis's words echoing in my head. Handle it with the exact same precision you apply in this room. For the first time since that disastrous steak dinner, I felt clear. I felt centered. He was right. This wasn't a messy, emotional family drama anymore. It was an operation. My father had taken a hostage, my mother's future. My job was to conduct a rescue. I went back to the anonymous hotel room I'd booked near my mother's home in Virginia, away from D.C. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was Major Conrad, JAG Corps, and I was planning a campaign. I sat at the cheap desk, my laptop open, the glow of the screen illuminating a stack of legal pads. I was mapping out my father's corporate structure, the one he boasted about at barbecues. I was outlining the legal basis for fraudulent conveyance. I was working, I was focused, I was precise. And then, at 1:30 in the morning, my phone rang. My stomach dropped. A call at that hour is never good news. I looked at the screen. It was my mother. I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering. Mom, are you okay? Millie? Her voice was a thin, trembling whisper. She was crying so hard she could barely breathe. Millie, what are you doing? What? Mom, slow down. What's wrong? Your father, she choked out. Your father, Robert, he just called me. He's furious. What did he say to you, Mom? I was already on my feet, the operation instantly dissolving back into that familiar, messy, primal fear. He said, oh God, Millie, he said you're trying to ruin him. He said you're digging into his business. He said if you don't stop, he's going to cut my health insurance. The blood went cold in my veins. My heart didn't stop. It felt like it had been instantly encased in ice. My mother has high blood pressure. She has a heart condition that was diagnosed a decade ago. She relies on her daily medication, the kind of medication that keeps her stable, the kind that, if she missed it for even a week, could result in a catastrophic event. And in America, without insurance, that medication costs thousands of dollars a month. He said he'd take me off his plan, she sobbed. He said, let's see how long Elena survives without her pills. This was Robert Conrad. This was his move. He knew he couldn't intimidate me. He knew I wasn't his sobbing, broken wife. He knew I was a lawyer, an officer, and that I was, for the first time, angry. So he did what all narcissistic abusers do when they feel their control slipping. He found the leash that was still around my neck, and he pulled. He knew I didn't fear him. But he knew that I loved my mother. He can't do that, Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, professional, like the lawyer I was. That's illegal. A judge would never allow him to. Millie, please, she shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. You don't understand. You're not here. He can do anything. He will. He'll tie it up in court. He'll say I'm not eligible. He'll do something. I can't live without my medicine, Millie. I can't. Her voice broke, and the next words shattered me. Please, honey, she begged, her voice shrinking back into that familiar whisper of the woman I saw at the steakhouse. Just Just let him have what he wants. Please. Don't make things worse for me. We'll be fine. I'll be fine. Just stop. She was begging me. She was begging me to save her by letting him win. She was begging me to let her abuser complete the financial destruction of her life because she was, justifiably, terrified of the physical alternative. I told her I would handle it. I told her to lock her doors. I told her I would call her in the morning. I hung up the phone and my hands were shaking so violently I dropped it on the carpet. This was his masterpiece, his checkmate. He had placed me in an impossible trap, a perfect no-win situation. Option A. I fight. I use my skills. I expose his fraud. I get my mother the 50% she is legally owed, and I risk her health. I risk him cutting her off in a fit of rage and her having a stroke or a heart attack before I can get a judge to intervene. Option B. I back down. I let him win. I let him throw her out with a used car and just enough money for a few months' rent just so he'll keep paying for her medication. I let him destroy her financially to save her physically. I paced the hotel room from the window to the door, back and forth, back and forth. I felt a suffocating tightness in my throat, the same feeling I had at that barbecue, the feeling of being small and trapped and powerless. For a second, I honestly, truly doubted myself. Maybe I should stop. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe I was being too aggressive. Maybe this was his world, his rules, and I was just a naive, clipboard carrier who was about to get her mother killed. His shadow was so large. It stretched from his house over hundreds of miles right into this hotel room, and it was choking me. I stopped pacing. I caught my reflection in the dark hotel window. I saw a woman who looked small and tired and terrified. I saw my mother's daughter. And then I thought of General Davis. I thought of his calm, steady voice in the silence of the skiff. Handle it with the exact same precision you apply in this room. Precision. I took a deep breath, and then another. The shaking in my hands began to slow. He was right. This wasn't a family problem. This wasn't a daughter's dilemma. This was an operation. My father was no longer a father. He was a hostile actor, and threatening to cut off essential medical care to coerce a desired outcome? That wasn't just a domestic threat. In my world, we had a name for that. It was an act of coercive control. It was an escalation. He had just escalated, and so would I. My father thought this was a two-player game, him versus my mother, with me as an annoying distraction. He didn't realize he had just declared war on a third player. I picked up my phone. The shaking was gone. I didn't call my father. I didn't call my mother. I dialed the number of the best civil litigation attorney in the state of Virginia, a woman I had served with at Fort Belvoir, a woman who ate men like my father for breakfast. She picked up on the third ring. Millie, it's 2 a.m. This better be good. Sarah, it is, I said, my voice as calm and steady as General Davis's. I need your help. I need you at the courthouse at 9 a.m. sharp. For what? I'm FedExing you the file now. My mother's life is in danger. I need an emergency injunction and a temporary restraining order against my father by 10 a.m. And I need you to file a motion to freeze every single asset he owns, domestic and international, immediately. After that phone call with my mother, the doubt didn't just disappear. It was incinerated. That agonizing, paralyzing sense of being torn. It was gone. I was no longer torn. I was angry. It wasn't a hot, screaming rage like my father's barbecue performances. It was a cold, pure, righteous fury. It was the kind of anger that clarifies, the kind that burns away all the fog and leaves only a single, sharp point of focus. General Davis was right. This was an operation. Sarah, my lawyer, had the immediate threat handled. She was at the courthouse at 9 a.m., and by 10:30 a.m., she had successfully argued for an emergency restraining order and a temporary injunction, freezing my father's known local assets and legally barring him from touching my mother's health insurance. That bought me time. That bought my mother's safety. But I knew it wasn't enough. An injunction is a temporary plug in a bursting dam. My father was a man of logistics and international business. I knew his known assets were just the tip of the iceberg. The real money, The money he was planning to disappear with would be hidden, and I had exactly 2 weeks until the next preliminary hearing. So, the hunt began. I didn't go back to the skiff. This was no longer official Army business. This was personal. But I had been trained by the Army. I had every skill the JAG Corps had ever taught me, and I was about to apply them with a precision my father could not possibly comprehend. I didn't sleep for more than 4 hours a night. I turned my cheap Virginia hotel room into a command center. I lived on lukewarm coffee from the lobby and pure adrenaline. I sat in the darkness, surrounded by legal pads, my only light the pale blue glow of my encrypted laptop. My father thought his paperwork was clean. He boasted about his clever accountants. But in my world, in the world of forensic accounting, clean paperwork that is too perfect, too neat, is its own kind of fingerprint. It's a trail. He thought he was a brilliant businessman. I saw an amateur. He had used a legal structure I recognized instantly, a classic 3-tier system that I had seen arms dealers and narco-terrorists use to wash their money. It was arrogant. It was sloppy. He had bragged for years that I didn't understand his world. The truth was, I understood it better than he did. I lived in that world every day, hunting men 10 times smarter and 100 times more dangerous than him. He was just a bully. A suburban kingpin. I started pulling the threads. The money trail was designed to be confusing, from his main business account in Virginia to a shell LLC in Delaware. From the Delaware LLC to a numbered account in a Swiss bank, known for its discretion. And from Switzerland, the trail vanished. He was good. He'd covered his tracks, but he didn't know who was hunting him. I used techniques I'm not allowed to talk about. I used every legal database I had access to. I cross-referenced incorporation papers, tax IDs, and signatory lists. For 3 days, I hit a wall. The Swiss account was a black hole, and then I found the mistake. The same arrogance that made him pat me on the head at a barbecue. He hadn't wired the money from Switzerland. He had wired it to Switzerland from the Delaware LLC. But to fund the Delaware LLC, he had used a different, smaller account, a local account. And on that account, I found a single wire transfer to a law firm in the Cayman Islands, designated for incorporation fees. I had him. I used a public records search for the Cayman Islands Corporate Registry. I typed in the name of the law firm, and a list of recently incorporated entities popped up. One stood out. It was listed as a logistics and shipping company. I checked the registration documents, and that's when I saw the name. I had to read it 3 times. My brain simply refused to process what my eyes were seeing. The name of the shell company, the offshore entity my father had created to hide millions of dollars from his wife of 30 years, was REM Logistics. REM Robert, Elena, Millie. I dropped the mouse. My hand flew to my mouth. I didn't feel anger. I felt a wave of cold, physical sickness. I felt nauseous. He had done that. He had taken the first initials of our names, the family he was currently in the process of systematically destroying, and he had used them to name the very weapon he was using to do it. This wasn't just fraud. This wasn't just greed. It was a joke. It was a sick, twisted, narcissistic joke. It was the ultimate act of contempt. It was his final triumphant pat on the head. He was laughing at us. He was mocking us, telling us we were so small, so insignificant, so stupid, that he could literally hide his crimes in plain sight using our own names, and we would never be smart enough to find it. That was the moment the dam broke. That was the final straw. Every last shred of duty, every lingering, desperate hope that my father, all that was left, was the cold, hard, unblinking truth. I stood up from the desk and walked to the hotel window, looking down at the 4 a.m. traffic, at the lights of the city that was not my home. I thought of a quote from St. Augustine, one that was drilled into me during my ethics courses. The truth is like a lion. You don't need to defend it. Let it loose. It will defend itself. My father thought he was a lion, all noise and roaring at a barbecue. He thought he was the king of his little jungle. He was nothing but a liar. A common, arrogant, sloppy liar. I wasn't going to argue with him at the hearing. I wasn't going to try and negotiate for my mother's fair share. I wasn't going to ask him for anything. I was going to do exactly what he had dared me to do at that steakhouse. I was going to use the very weapons he had ridiculed his entire life: the law, the facts, the paperwork. I was going to take my boring job, my data entry, my clipboard, and I was going to dismantle his entire empire with it. He thought he was in a divorce proceeding. He had no idea he was about to be the target of a full-scale forensic audit conducted by me. I was going to unleash my lion right in the middle of that quiet, boring county courtroom. I wasn't just going to protect my mother. I was going to burn his world to the ground using nothing but his own Captain Clipboard. And if you have ever felt that cold, clarifying anger, that moment when the fog of doubt disappears and you know exactly what you have to do, hit that like button. Let me know in the comments. What was your REM logistics moment? What was that final straw for you? The white-hot rage from that discovery, the sick, twisted joke of REM logistics, had cooled. It didn't disappear. It hardened. It settled deep in my chest, forging itself into something else. It became a cold, dense, steel-like resolve. The next 6 weeks were the longest, most focused, and most intense of my life. The emergency injunction had bought my mother's safety, but it had also officially declared war. My father, through his lawyer, was fighting back, claiming the offshore account was a standard business practice and a complete misunderstanding. He was arrogant. He was still underestimating me. He still thought I was just Captain Clipboard. So, I embraced it. I turned my hotel room into a tactical operations center, a war room. My bed was covered in bank statements. The cheap art on the walls was taped over with flowcharts I'd drawn on hotel stationery, mapping out my father's corporate shell game. I worked like I had been trained to do, with surgical precision. My days were a blur of legal filings, subpoenas, and cross-referencing bank codes. I was a ghost, fueled by bad coffee and a singular purpose. I used my training in forensic accounting to follow the money, not just to the Cayman Islands, but beyond. I found the $8.7 million. I found the exact wire transfers, documenting that over 72% of their liquid marital assets had been moved after the date my father had filed for divorce. This wasn't just hiding money. This was the textbook definition of fraudulent conveyance. It was a felony. But I knew my father. He would lie. He would claim his accountants made a mistake. He would throw someone else under the bus. REM logistics was disgusting. But I needed more. I needed something that couldn't be spun. I needed to be 100% sure. I couldn't leave a single element to chance. I picked up my phone and called an old friend in D.C., Mark Thompson. We'd been in the JAG Corps together at Fort Bragg, one of the sharpest international finance lawyers I'd ever met. He'd left the service a few years back and was now a partner at a massive D.C. law firm, the kind of place that ate international fraud cases for breakfast. "Mark, it's Millie," I said. "Conrad. Hell, it's been a while. How's life at the Pentagon?" "It's complicated. Listen, Mark, I need a favor. Something completely off the books. A personal matter." His voice sobered up instantly. "You got it. What do you need?" "I'm sending you an encrypted file. I need a second set of eyes, Mark. I need you to tell me if I'm crazy or if what I'm looking at is what I think it is." "Sending it now," I said, hitting enter on my laptop. I didn't have to wait long. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Mark. "Jesus Christ, Millie," he said. There was no friendly greeting, just pure, unadulterated shock. Who is this guy? Is he an amateur, or is he just the most arrogant man on the planet? "Both," I replied, a cold knot of validation forming in my stomach. "So you see it?" "See it? Millie, I see all of it. The fraudulent conveyance is bad enough. The REM logistics thing is, well, that's just sick. But that's not even the home run." "What do you mean?" I asked, sitting upright. "The wire transfers from the Delaware LLC. He didn't just fund the Cayman account. He used the same Delaware holding company to make 3 separate disguised payments to a flagged entity in Eastern Europe. The same entity, Millie, that you and I briefed DIA on back in 19. The one linked to the Russian oligarchs." My blood ran cold. "He's not just hiding money from my mother. He's doing business with them." "He's laundering it for them," Mark corrected. Or, at best, he's so stupid he's letting them launder him. With these documents, Millie, you don't just win a civil suit, you can get him criminally indicted for money laundering and violating the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. This evidence, it's not just ironclad, it's a damn vault. He's done, Millie, he's done. I hung up the phone, a wave of cold, absolute certainty washing over me. This was it. This was my evidence. This was my procedure. This was my jurisdiction. I spent the rest of that night at a 24-hour Kinko's. My father had thrown a thin 3-page settlement at my mother. I was preparing my response. I printed everything, every single wire transfer, every email from the Swiss bank, every digital signature, every corporate charter for every shell company, from Virginia to Delaware to the Cayman Islands. I printed the cross-referenced reports from the Eastern European accounts. Page by page, I methodically slid each one into a clear plastic sheet protector. Click. Whir. Slide. The rhythm of the work was a meditation. This wasn't a thin sheaf of papers. This was a 3-inch thick, meticulously organized cross-referenced indictment. This was the work of Captain Clipboard. It was 5 a.m. when I was finally finished. I had a heavy 3-ring binder that contained the complete and total destruction of Robert Conrad. But I didn't put the binder in my briefcase. I went back to my hotel room, took a shower, and put on my uniform. Then I took the binder and selected 10 key pages. The greatest hits. The REM Logistics Charter. The $8.7 million wire transfer. The Swiss account summary. The payment to the Eastern European entity. I took those 10 pages, folded them neatly, and slid them into a simple, plain, manila envelope. The exact kind of envelope a Captain Clipboard would use for a routine memo. I licked the flap and sealed it. My father thought he was walking into a simple divorce hearing. He thought he was going to swagger in, complain about his finances, and bully my mother into signing away her life. He thought he was walking into his arena. He had no idea he was walking into a full-scale forensic audit. He had no idea he was walking into mine. We were back in that stale, musty county courtroom. 6 weeks had passed since I'd placed that simple manila envelope in my briefcase. 6 weeks of my mother living in a state of suspended terror. And 6 weeks of my father's lawyer filing motions, claiming his client was the victim of a vindictive, overzealous daughter. I sat in the back row, in my full Class A uniform, watching the theater. My father, Robert, walked in with that same familiar, self-satisfied swagger. He owned this room, just like he owned the steakhouse, just like he owned the backyard barbecue. He shot a confident wink at his lawyer, a slick man in a suit that probably cost more than my car. He didn't even look at my mother. Elena, my mother, was sitting at the petitioner's table, looking exactly as she had for 30 years, invisible. She was hunched over, her hands trembling in her lap, her eyes fixed on the scarred wooden table in front of her. The judge, an older man who looked like he'd seen it all and was tired of most of it, sighed. "Mr. Conrad, please approach." My father strode up. He placed his hand on the Bible, his face a mask of solemn sincerity. "Do you swear," the bailiff droned, "that the financial disclosures you have filed with this court are the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God." "I do," my father said, that familiar, arrogant smirk playing on his lips. He was lying. He was committing perjury, right there, hand on the Bible, without a flicker of fear. The judge nodded, looking at the clock. He just wanted to get to lunch. "Very well, Mrs. Conrad," he said, his voice flat with boredom. "Your husband's offer, as outlined in this agreement, is minimal, but it is, technically, legal if you agree to it. Do you agree to these terms?" This was it. My mother looked up. Her eyes, brimming with tears, found mine in the back of the courtroom. I gave her a single, sharp nod. Her gaze dropped back to the table. Her trembling hand, the hand I had held at West Point, reached for the cheap ballpoint pen. She was going to sign. After everything, she was still going to sign. No, I would not let it happen. Scrape. The sound of my chair legs dragging across the old linoleum floor was as loud as a gunshot in the silent room. Every head snapped toward me. My father's face, which had been smiling, turned a dark, furious red. "Millie," he hissed, his voice echoing. "What in the hell do you think you're doing? Sit down." The judge, startled from his apathy, slammed his gavel. "Order!" "Ma'am, who are you? This is a closed hearing. You are not counsel of record. Sit down, or I will have you removed for contempt." I didn't sit. I took one slow, measured breath. I walked forward, my footsteps echoing, until I reached the bar, the low wooden gate separating the spectators from the court. I looked the judge square in the eye. Slowly, deliberately, I reached up and removed my army beret, the green fabric a stark contrast to the drab courtroom. I placed it, perfectly aligned, on the wooden railing of the bar. In that moment, I was not his daughter. I was not Elena's savior. I was an officer of the court. "My apologies for the interruption, Your Honor," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was clear, and it did not shake. It was the voice I used in the skiff. Major Millie Conrad, United States Army Judge Advocate General's Corps, Virginia State Bar ID 8451. The room went utterly, profoundly silent. My father and his lawyer were frozen, staring at me as if I'd just grown a second head. "Your Honor," I continued, my voice resonating in the small space, "I am present today not as a family member, but as an officer of the court. I have direct material evidence of gross perjury and significant financial fraud being committed in this room, right now, by the defendant, Mr. Conrad." My father's lawyer jumped up. "Objection. Your Honor, this is an outrageous breach of decorum. This is theater. She has no standing." The judge looked at the lawyer. Then he looked at me, at my uniform, at my beret on his bar. He was no longer bored. He was wide awake. "Objection overruled, Counselor. Sit down." He turned his full attention to me. "Major Conrad, you are making an incredibly serious allegation. You had better be able to back it up." "I can, Your Honor," I said. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the simple, plain, manila envelope I had prepared. I laid it on the judge's bench. He looked at the envelope, then at me. He tore open the flap. He pulled out the 10 folded pages I had selected. He began to read. I watched his face. First, confusion. Then his eyes widened. He licked his thumb and turned to the second page. He read. He turned to the third page. A small sound escaped his throat. It was a low chuckle, quiet and incredulous. He looked up from the papers, over his glasses, at my father. Then he looked back down at the papers. "Oh my," he whispered, a small smile of pure professional amusement on his face. "Oh, this is brilliant." My father's smug mask began to crack. "Your Honor? I don't know what she gave you." The judge held up a hand, silencing him. The amusement was gone. His voice was now pure ice. "Mr. Conrad," he said, "a moment ago you placed your hand on that Bible and swore that your financial disclosure, which lists 0 foreign assets, was the truth. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor, it is. My business is entirely domestic." "Is that so?" The judge held up the first paper from the envelope. "Then perhaps you can explain this wire transfer, dated 4 weeks ago, for $8.7 million, to a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands under the name Rem Logistics?" My father's jaw dropped. The blood drained from his face, leaving him a sick, morbid, chalky white. He looked at his lawyer, who was staring at the floor, wanting to be anywhere else. The judge didn't wait for an answer. He looked at me. "Major," he said, and for the first time, there was genuine respect in his voice. "This paperwork you've provided, this is the most meticulous, damning, and beautifully prepared piece of forensic accounting I have ever seen in my 20 years on this bench." He turned back to my father. The gavel struck the desk, the sound making everyone jump. "This settlement agreement is hereby declared null and void," the judge boomed. "Based on the evidence presented by Major Conrad, I am freezing all of the defendant's assets, foreign and domestic, effective immediately. I am ordering a full criminal investigation by the District Attorney's Office into perjury and felony financial fraud." He looked at my mother, who was staring at him, her hands covering her mouth. And furthermore, the judge declared, the entire $8.7 million discovered by this court is awarded to Mrs. Conrad as immediate punitive damages. This hearing is adjourned. The judge's final words echoed in the stunned silence of the courtroom. The gavel strike felt like a physical blow. My father didn't collapse heroically. He disintegrated. He didn't just fall, he imploded. The arrogant crimson mask of rage from Chapter 8 dissolved, revealing the pathetic, terrified man underneath. No, he stammered, his voice suddenly weak and reedy. No, you can't. That's not possible. He turned, wild-eyed, to his lawyer. The lawyer, the slick man in the expensive suit, was already shoving his papers into his briefcase with the frantic, terrified energy of a man trying to flee a burning building. He wasn't making eye contact with his client. He was trying to disassociate, to get as far away from the legal shrapnel as possible. Do something, Robert shrieked, his voice cracking. He pointed a shaking finger at me, as if I were the one who had betrayed him. That's my daughter. She can't do this to me. She can't. It was the desperate cry of a king who had just realized his crown was fake and his castle was made of sand. And then, in a final pathetic display, he clutched his chest. He gasped, his eyes rolling back, and slumped sideways into his chair, letting out a pained groan. My chest, he wheezed. The lawyer froze, looking at him with undisguised disgust. Was it a real heart attack, a panic attack, or just one last, cheap, theatrical attempt to regain control of the room, to make himself the victim? I watched the performance, and the strangest thing happened. I felt nothing. No, that's not true. It wasn't nothing. It was emptiness. I had waited my whole life for this moment. The moment my father would finally see me. The moment I would win. I had envisioned feeling triumphant, a surge of righteous, avenging joy. I expected to feel something. But as I looked at the broken, gasping man in the chair, the man who had called me Captain Clipboard, the man who had patted my head like a dog, the man who had built a shell company on the foundation of our names, I felt no vindication, no satisfaction, not even anger. Just a vast, hollow, profound emptiness. The war was over, the dragon was slain, and I just felt tired. My gaze shifted. I did not look at him again. My eyes found my mother. She was still sitting at the table, just as she had been when the judge spoke. She was completely still. Tears were streaming down her face, pouring silently from her eyes and dripping onto the table. But they were not the tears of fear I had seen at the steakhouse. They were not the hysterical tears of a victim I'd heard over the phone. I looked closer. Her face, though wet, was calm. Her shoulders, for the first EAN 978-234-780 time in my memory, were not hunched in fear. They were relaxed. These were the tears of release. She was watching 30 years of hell, 30 years of being gaslit, belittled, and emotionally eroded dissolve in front of her. The spell was broken. The nightmare was over. That was the victory. Not his collapse. Her release. I pushed past the bar, my beret still sitting on the railing. I ignored the chaos surrounding my father, the bailiff moving toward him, his lawyer trying to explain that he was not his client's medical proxy. Major Conrad, the lawyer called out, suddenly remembering his job. He scrambled to intercept me, blocking my path to my mother. Major Conrad, wait. This ruling it's aberrant. We can appeal. We can negotiate. I didn't slow down. I didn't stop. I simply looked at him. I didn't look at him. I looked through him. I looked at this desperate, sweating man as if he were a pane of glass, an irrelevant obstacle. Get out of my way, I said. My voice was flat. It was cold. It was not a request. It was the same tone I had used in the skiff. It was the tone of an officer giving a lawful, final order. He flinched, and instinctively, he stepped aside. I reached my mother. She was still crying silently, looking at her hands. I stood in front of her and held out my own. Let's go, Mom, I said. She looked up at my hand. She looked at my face. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the first real breath she'd taken in decades. She put her hand in mine, and she squeezed. It wasn't the weak, trembling hand of a victim. It was a strong, firm, powerful grip. It was the grip of a woman who had just woken up from a 30-year-long nightmare. I pulled her gently to her feet. Together, we turned our backs on the scene. We walked past the defense table, past the panicking lawyer, past the man still slumped in his chair. "Millie!" I heard my father's voice behind me. It was no longer a bellow of rage. It was a weak, desperate, terrified shriek. "Millie, don't leave! You can't! Millie!" I kept walking. My mother kept walking. We did not turn around. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom. The bright, sterile, fluorescent light of the hallway flooded in, a shocking contrast to the dim, oppressive room we were leaving. We stepped out together, into that bright hallway, and the doors swung shut behind us, the thud of the wood sealing off the past. We left 30 years of pain, 30 years of humiliation, 30 years of suffering behind us in that room. I didn't feel like a winner. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel hate or even pity. I just felt exhausted. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt completely and utterly free. 1 year later, the air no longer smelled of stale paper and quiet desperation. Today, the air was full of the scent of damp earth, rich lavender, and freshly ground coffee. I was sitting at a small wrought iron table in Elena's garden, the small bright flower shop my mother had opened with the money from the punitive damages settlement. It was nestled on a cobblestone side street in Leesburg, Virginia, a town known for its history and its charm. A small bell tinkled every time a customer entered. My mother was behind the counter, and she was unrecognizable. The ghost was gone. The woman who had been eroded down to a whisper, who had shrunk into herself at the steakhouse, who had trembled as she reached for that pen. She was gone. In her place was Elena. Her hands, the same hands that had trembled so violently, were now steady, streaked with potting soil. She was laughing with a customer, a woman in a bright yellow sweater, advising her on the best soil for hydrangeas. She was full of life. She was full of purpose. She had, in every sense of the word, been reborn. And me? I was sitting in a patch of sunlight streaming through the front window, sipping a latte. I was no longer Major Conrad. I was Lieutenant Colonel Conrad. My promotion had come through 6 months prior. General Davis had pinned the silver oak leaf on my uniform himself in a quiet ceremony. "You earned this, Colonel," he'd said, with that same rare nod of approval. Life had moved on. The war was over. We were at peace. And then, my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced down. An unknown number. I didn't get many of those. I picked it up, a flicker of the old familiar anxiety tightening my chest for just a second. It was a text message. I opened it. "Millie, it's Dad. I'm losing everything. They're talking about prosecution. The feds are involved. You know the law. You're my daughter. You have to help me." I read the words. I read them a second time. And a third. He still didn't get it. After everything, after the courtroom, after the public humiliation, after the proof of his sick, twisted, REM logistics joke, after the criminal investigation had taken everything from him, he still didn't understand. There was no apology, no remorse, no, "I'm sorry for what I did to you." No, "I'm sorry for what I did to your mother." He was still giving orders. "You know the law. You're my daughter. You have to help me." He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was requesting a service. After all this time, he still saw me as his property. He still believed that, in the end, I was just Captain Clipboard, his personal legal tool, a functionary to be deployed to fix his messes. I looked at the message, at the gray bubble on my screen, and I waited. I waited for the old familiar surge of white-hot rage I'd felt at the barbecue. I waited for the cold, nauseating shock I'd felt when I saw the name, REM. I waited for the crushing anxiety I'd felt during that midnight phone call. I even waited for a small dark flicker of triumph, of smug, self-satisfied victory. But nothing came. There was no anger. There was no pain. There was no victory. There was just silence. A peaceful, empty void. The case, I realized, was finally, truly closed. Not just legally, but emotionally. He and his problems, his chaos, his noise, they had no power over me anymore. They were just words from a stranger. They were irrelevant. Lieutenant Colonel? I looked up. My mother was standing by my table, holding a small pot with a bright red flower. "Are you still with us?" she asked, her eyes sparkling. She was smiling. "You have to come see this new shipment of tulips. They're absolutely beautiful." Tulips, a symbol of spring, of rebirth. I looked down at the phone in my hand, at the message demanding I return to the war, to the darkness, to the fighting. Then I looked up at my mother, at her face, so full of life, at the bright red tulip in her dirt-caked hands. I smiled. "Coming, Mom," I said. I picked up the phone one last time. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't type a reply. There was nothing left to say. I pressed the contact's name. I scrolled down. And I selected block. I turned the phone off and set it, screen down, on the table. I stood up and walked over to my mother, into the smell of damp earth and lavender. I had learned, through all of this, that real strength wasn't the loudest voice at a barbecue. It wasn't the biggest bank account or the most arrogant laugh. Real strength was the silence. It was the meticulous truth. It was the paperwork. It was the unshakable, quiet power of Captain Clipboard. And above all, I learned that strength is the right to choose your own peace, to choose the tulips over the war. And I had chosen peace. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. My story is finished, but I know for many of you, your own story is ongoing. If you've ever felt unseen or had to fight to reclaim your value from the people who were supposed to cherish it, please know you are not alone. Your peace is worth fighting for. For more stories of resilience and healing, please like and subscribe to the channel. And if you feel comfortable, share a part of your own journey in the comments below. We are listening.